He froze as the ultrasound flickered to life, his hand tightening on the probe. In the tiny heartbeat on the screen, the doctor saw not just a child, but a piece of his own past he thought was gone forever. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow, I'll be sharing another exciting story you definitely won't want to miss. Now let's get back to the story. Dr. Adrian Cole moved like a man who lived more in his head than in the world around him. The hospital corridors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, their polished floors echoing his steps, yet nothing about them touched him. His eyes, sharp and practiced, seemed to slide over faces without ever seeing them. To his colleagues, he was dependable, brilliant even, an obstetrician who never missed a detail. But to those who looked closer, there was something in his silences that felt heavier than exhaustion. He lived his life with precision. Up at 5, black coffee, no sugar. A jog that carried him past the same 3 blocks, the same empty stairs of shop fronts, before showering in a sterile apartment where no picture frames decorated the walls. Patients came and went, their stories blurred together. Babies were delivered, tears were shed, and he offered practiced reassurances. He was good at his job, but there was no warmth in the way he spoke, no softness left in the way his hand rested on a patient's shoulder. It hadn't always been like that. Once, Adrian had believed in joy, believed in beginnings, but years ago, a single night had stolen that from him. Since then, he buried himself in work, convincing himself that if he kept moving, kept healing others, he could outrun the shadow that haunted him. He never did. On the other side of the city, in a mansion with tall glass windows and pristine marble floors, Evelyn Sterling sat alone in a room too large for her comfort. She was 28, wife to billionaire industrialist Charles Sterling, a man whose empire was discussed in financial magazines and whispered about in boardrooms. To the world, she was enviable, draped in designer gowns, photographed at galas, admired for her elegance. But in private, her life felt like a performance in a play she had never agreed to star in. Her husband was a man who loved his empire more than intimacy. He provided her with everything, except himself. The house was full of staff, yet she felt like the loneliest woman in the world. Her pregnancy, unexpected and both a blessing and a burden, had not changed much between them. Charles spoke of heirs, legacy, Sterling bloodlines. Evelyn, however, longed for something else, for the simple feeling of being loved, of being known beyond the way she looked when the cameras flashed. She placed her hand gently over the swell of her belly, whispering words to the child that no one else could hear. "You'll be my reason," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Even if I have to do this alone." The wind rattled against the tall windows, and she pulled the silk shawl tighter around her shoulders. Wealth wrapped her in comfort, but it could not keep away the cold of loneliness. The hospital waiting area was crowded that morning. Evelyn sat there, her fingers laced together so tightly they ached. She wore no jewelry except her wedding band, and though her coat was tailored, her face was bare of makeup. She hated the way people glanced at her, recognizing her name from glossy magazines. Wealth had a way of making people assume your life was perfect. She caught her reflection in the polished surface of the floor tiles, poised, immaculate, yet hollow-eyed. At that same hour, Adrian leaned against the counter in his office, scanning patient files. His assistant tapped lightly on the door. "Dr. Cole, your next appointment has arrived." "Mrs. Sterling." He barely looked up. "Send her in." The name didn't mean much to him. He had heard it in passing before, but he kept himself distant from anything beyond his profession. Still, something about the way the assistant hesitated lingered. Evelyn walked in, her steps careful but graceful. She carried herself with the kind of dignity one learns from living under scrutiny. When her eyes met Adrian's, she offered a polite smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Adrian nodded curtly, motioning to the chair beside his desk. "Mrs. Sterling." Please sit. How far along are we today? Her voice was soft, measured. 21 weeks. He scribbled it onto her chart, his handwriting neat but devoid of flourish. And how have you been feeling? Any complications? Just tired, she admitted, though her tone hinted at more than fatigue. Their exchange was professional, but under the surface, unspoken things stirred. Adrian noticed how her gaze drifted to the window, how she avoided his eyes when speaking. Evelyn, in turn, felt the weight of his silence, different from the usual cold efficiency of doctors. His quietness was thick, almost aching. She found herself wanting to ask him if he was all right, but she didn't. As he prepared the ultrasound machine, Adrian's hands moved automatically, but his chest felt unusually heavy. Something about this patient unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. He draped the gel bottle across his fingers, glanced at Evelyn, and noticed the way she held her belly, not absently, like most patients, but with both protectiveness and desperation, as though it was her lifeline. "Lie back, please," he said, his voice calm but clipped. She reclined, closing her eyes briefly as the cold gel touched her skin. Adrian pressed the probe gently, the machine humming to life. The screen flickered. Shapes emerged in grainy black and white. And then, there it was. A steady rhythm. The unmistakable flicker of a tiny heart. Evelyn's lips parted in awe, her eyes filling with tears. That's my baby." But Adrian didn't answer immediately. His breath caught. His hand stiffened. The sound of the heartbeat filled the room, fast and fragile. But to Adrian, it wasn't just a sound, it was an echo. A sound he hadn't heard in years, one that belonged to another child, another time, another life he thought he had lost forever. His jaw tightened. His eyes blurred. He tried to blink it away, to steady himself. But Evelyn noticed. She noticed the way his expression shifted from clinical detachment to something raw, almost broken. Her heart pounded. "Doctor, are you all right?" Adrian forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse. "Yes, I'm fine." But the way his fingers trembled betrayed him. For the first time in years, the walls around him cracked. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt that someone else in the room was carrying a weight as heavy as hers. If you were Evelyn, sitting on that table and seeing the doctor react so strangely to your ultrasound, would you press him for the truth or stay silent? Share your thoughts in the comments. The room was silent, save for the steady flutter on the monitor. The sound of Evelyn's baby's heartbeat filled the space with an almost sacred rhythm, like the faint drumming of hope against walls that had only ever known emptiness. She stared at the screen, tears slipping unbidden down her cheeks. But Adrian wasn't watching the screen the way most expectant doctors did. He wasn't smiling, wasn't reassuring her with practiced lines about growth and health. Instead, his face had gone pale, his jaw rigid, his eyes fixed in a way that frightened her. "Doctor," she whispered, her voice fragile. He blinked, as if pulled violently back from somewhere far away. His lips parted, but no words came. The probe in his hand wavered slightly, and he steadied it with a sharp breath. His throat tightened. He forced professionalism back into his tone, but it came out thin. "The heartbeat looks strong. Your child is developing well." Evelyn exhaled, relief flooding her, but it was short-lived. She wasn't blind. She had seen the way his eyes had softened, then shattered. She had seen the tremor in his hand. Something about this moment meant more to him than he wanted her to know. She turned her head on the pillow to study him. "Are you sure everything's all right?" Adrian swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes." He adjusted the probe with a mechanical precision that betrayed his inner storm. But Evelyn was not satisfied. For years she had lived beside a man who hid his true self behind layers of armor. She recognized the signs of someone covering their soul. And here was this doctor, this stranger, who for a fleeting second had looked at her child like it was a ghost returned to him. Her fingers curled tighter over her belly. "Do you have children, Dr. Cole?" she asked softly, breaking the heavy quiet. The question hit him like glass shattering on tile. His grip faltered. He froze, eyes locked on the screen. Memories surged, flashes of laughter, a tiny hand gripping his finger, a night full of panic and loss he had buried so deep he thought it would never resurface. His lips pressed into a hard line. Not anymore. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Evelyn's eyes widened, her breath catching. She hadn't expected honesty. Not like that. Not in that raw, unguarded tone. For a heartbeat, she felt her chest ache for him. The machine beeped softly as the ultrasound continued, the baby's heartbeat pulsing in the background like an echo of his grief. Adrian quickly cleared his throat, forcing his walls back up. "Forgive me. That was unprofessional." But Evelyn shook her head, her own voice trembling. "No, it wasn't. It was human." For a moment, their gazes locked. His eyes were stormy, hers glistening. Neither spoke, yet everything was said. Two people bound by different kinds of loneliness, now tethered by something they couldn't yet name. The examination ended, but the weight lingered. Adrian wiped the gel gently from her belly, his touch careful, reverent even. Evelyn studied him in silence, her mind racing. She wanted to ask him what had happened. She wanted to understand why her baby's heartbeat had cracked open something inside him. But she also feared pressing too hard, too soon. When he finally spoke, his voice was clipped, back to its restrained rhythm. "I'll print the scans. Everything looks normal. We'll schedule your next appointment in 2 weeks." She nodded slowly, adjusting her blouse, but her eyes lingered on him. "Thank you, doctor." He gave a short nod, not meeting her gaze. As she left the room, her heels clicking softly on the floor, Adrian collapsed into the chair by his desk. He pressed his palms to his eyes, breathing unevenly. The sound of the heartbeat still echoed in his ears. For years, he had trained himself not to feel, to bury the loss of his daughter beneath clinical duty. But that sound, her child's heartbeat, had torn open the wound he thought had scarred over. Why this child? Why this woman? He didn't know. In the hallway, Evelyn walked slowly, one hand on her stomach, her thoughts swirling. She had entered the hospital expecting routine scans, sterile reassurances. Instead, she left haunted by the look on her doctor's face. Who was this man who carried such sorrow in his silence? Why had her baby's heartbeat shaken him so deeply? Her driver opened the car door outside, and she slipped into the leather seat. But as the city rolled by, glittering with lights and life, she barely saw it. For the first time in months, her mind wasn't on her husband or her lonely house, or the image the world expected her to maintain. It was on her doctor, the way his mask had cracked, the way he had whispered not anymore. She touched her belly again, her heart aching with questions. That evening, Adrian sat in his apartment with the blinds drawn, the ultrasound image lying on his desk. He had printed it for her, but another copy sat there, staring back at him. He didn't know why he had kept it. He poured himself a glass of water, staring at the photo. The tiny shape in the scan seemed to burn into him, stirring memories he had sworn never to relive. He remembered a crib that had never been used again, a lullaby that had ended too soon, a ring he had worn on his finger until he couldn't bear to anymore. He pressed his hand to his forehead, whispering under his breath, "Why now? 2 people, 1 heartbeat." A connection neither could yet define, but one that would change everything. Adrian Cole had spent his entire career mastering control. Control of his tone, his hands, his emotions. But as he drove home after that appointment, he realized his control had cracked. He could still hear it, the fast, fragile heartbeat. Not just a sound, but a memory. His daughter's heartbeat. Gone too soon, yet alive in the way Evelyn Sterling's child had called it back to life. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles blanched. "You're a doctor. Nothing more. This is your patient. This is nothing." He repeated it like a mantra, like a lifeline. But the truth was clear. Something about her, about that moment, had shaken him to his core. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in the back seat of her chauffeured car, her reflection faint in the tinted glass. She should have felt relief. The scan had shown her baby was healthy. But instead, her thoughts circled back to Dr. Cole. The look in his eyes, the tremor in his hand, the way his voice broke when he admitted he had lost a child. She pressed her palm to her belly, whispering softly to her unborn baby. Why did it feel like your heartbeat mattered to him? At home, Charles was waiting. He stood at the bar, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. His suit jacket was draped neatly over the chair, his posture rigid with the kind of authority that filled boardrooms. Well, he asked without looking at her, his tone more business than tenderness. The baby is fine, Evelyn said gently. Healthy. Strong heartbeat. Charles nodded, taking a sip. Good. That's what matters. She waited, hoping for something more. Relief, joy, even a smile. But he only set the glass down and began talking about his next meeting. Evelyn sat quietly, her heart sinking. Once again, she felt like an ornament in a life that wasn't her own. But somewhere in the back of her mind, another image persisted. The doctor's pained eyes, his trembling hands. The next morning, Adrian tried to drown himself in work. He moved from one appointment to the next, efficient and professional. But every so often, his thoughts drifted. He found himself scanning charts longer than necessary, staring at ultrasound images as if searching for something he couldn't name. By noon, his colleague, Dr. Patel, raised an eyebrow at him. You all right, Adrian? You look off. I'm fine, Adrian said quickly, forcing a small smile. Just tired. But he wasn't fine. He was slipping. That night, he dreamed of his daughter again. He saw her laughing in a park, saw her running into his arms. And then, as always, the dream shifted. Sirens. A hospital bed. Silence where there had once been a heartbeat. He woke up drenched in sweat, his chest aching. He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. Not again, he muttered. Don't do this to yourself. For Evelyn, the resistance looked different. She tried to ignore the pull of curiosity, tried to convince herself that Dr. Cole was just another physician. But as she sat in her sunlit conservatory, her sketchbook open on her lap, her hand betrayed her. Without thinking, she found herself sketching a pair of eyes. Haunted, intense, familiar. His eyes. She slammed the book shut, her breath quick. This is ridiculous. When her phone buzzed, it was her friend Lila, one of the few people she could confide in. How's the little one? Lila asked warmly. Healthy, Evelyn said softly. The doctor says everything looks good. Good. And how are you? Evelyn hesitated. Her instinct was to say she was fine. But instead, the words slipped out. Hey, the doctor. He reacted strangely. When he heard the heartbeat, it was like he knew my child somehow. Lila chuckled lightly. Evelyn, you're probably just imagining things. You've been lonely, and maybe you're reading too much into it. Maybe, Evelyn whispered, though her chest told her otherwise. Back at the hospital, fate seemed to mock their attempts at distance. A minor complication with Evelyn's pregnancy, dizzy spells that alarmed Charles, brought her back for a follow-up sooner than scheduled. When Adrian saw her name on the chart again, his heart sank. Not her. Not so soon. But duty was duty. When she walked into his office, she offered a faint smile. Doctor. Mrs. Sterling, he said curtly, not allowing warmth into his tone. He forced his eyes onto the file, refusing to let them linger on her face. The air between them was thick with what was unsaid. Evelyn felt it pressing on her chest. Finally, unable to bear the silence, she spoke. I hope I didn't unsettle you last time, she said softly. When I asked about children, Adrian's head snapped up, his jaw tight. You didn't. That was unprofessional of me. It won't happen again. The coldness in his voice stung her more than she expected. She looked down, swallowing hard. I didn't mean to pry. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. You didn't. But I'm your doctor. That's all I can be. The words were meant as a boundary, but they sounded like a wound. Evelyn nodded slowly, but inside, something in her rebelled. Because for one brief moment, She had felt seen by him in a way she hadn't in years. And yet, here they both were, retreating, resisting, pretending they hadn't felt what they had felt. That night, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her gilded bedroom while Charles snored beside her. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "Why did it feel like your doctor knew us? Like we were part of something bigger?" And in another part of the city, Adrian sat alone with a glass of untouched whiskey, staring at the ultrasound photo he couldn't throw away. His lips trembled as he whispered into the dark, "Why her? Why now?" Neither of them had answers, only questions, and both were terrified of what the answers might mean. When you feel a powerful pull toward someone, but everything in you says stay away, do you listen to your fear or to your heart? Comment below with what you would do. The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the hospital windows like 1,000 impatient fists. Dr. Adrian Cole was finishing his rounds when the call came through. "Patient Evelyn Sterling," the nurse reported, her voice calm but urgent. "Brought in after a fainting spell at home. Stable, but we need you." Adrian froze, a mix of dread and inevitability washing over him. Of all the patients in the city, he closed his eyes for half a second, then forced himself into motion. "Prepare the monitoring room. I'll be there." When he entered, Evelyn was lying on the bed, her face pale but composed. Charles Sterling stood stiffly beside her, his expensive suit immaculate even in crisis. His hand rested on her shoulder, but his eyes were on Adrian the moment he walked in. "You're the doctor?" Charles's tone was clipped, guarded. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles blanched. "You're a doctor. Nothing more. This is your patient. This is nothing." He repeated it like a mantra, like a lifeline. But the truth was clear. Something about her, about that moment, had shaken him to his core. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in the back seat of her chauffeured car, her reflection faint in the tinted glass. She should have felt relief. The scan had shown her baby was healthy. But instead, her thoughts circled back to Dr. Cole. The look in his eyes, the tremor in his hand, the way his voice broke when he admitted he had lost a child. She pressed her palm to her belly, whispering softly to her unborn baby. Why did it feel like your heartbeat mattered to him? At home, Charles was waiting. He stood at the bar, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. His suit jacket was draped neatly over the chair, his posture rigid with the kind of authority that filled boardrooms. "Well?" he asked without looking at her, his tone more business than tenderness. "The baby is fine," Evelyn said gently. "Healthy. Strong heartbeat." Charles nodded, taking a sip. "Good. That's what matters." She waited, hoping for something more. Relief, joy, even a smile. But he only set the glass down and began talking about his next meeting. Evelyn sat quietly, her heart sinking. Once again, she felt like an ornament in a life that wasn't her own. But somewhere in the back of her mind, another image persisted. The doctor's pained eyes, his trembling hands. The next morning, Adrian tried to drown himself in work. He moved from one appointment to the next, efficient and professional. But every so often, his thoughts drifted. He found himself scanning charts longer than necessary, staring at ultrasound images as if searching for something he couldn't name. By noon, his colleague, Dr. Patel, raised an eyebrow at him. "You all right, Adrian? You look off." "I'm fine," Adrian said quickly, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." But he wasn't fine. He was slipping. That night, he dreamed of his daughter again. He saw her laughing in a park, saw her running into his arms. And then, as always, the dream shifted. Sirens. A hospital bed. Silence where there had once been a heartbeat. He woke up drenched in sweat, his chest aching. He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. "Not again," he muttered. "Don't do this to yourself." For Evelyn, the resistance looked different. She tried to ignore the pull of curiosity, tried to convince herself that Dr. Cole was just another physician. But as she sat in her sunlit conservatory, her sketchbook open on her lap, her hand betrayed her. Without thinking, She found herself sketching a pair of eyes. Haunted, intense, familiar. His eyes. She slammed the book shut, her breath quick. This is ridiculous. When her phone buzzed, it was her friend Lila, one of the few people she could confide in. "How's the little one?" Lila asked warmly. "Healthy," Evelyn said softly. "The doctor says everything looks good." "Good. And how are you?" Evelyn hesitated. Her instinct was to say she was fine, but instead, the words slipped out. "Hey, the doctor." He reacted strangely. When he heard the heartbeat, it was like he knew my child somehow. Lila chuckled lightly. "Evelyn, you're probably just imagining things. You've been lonely, and maybe you're reading too much into it." "Maybe," Evelyn whispered, though her chest told her otherwise. Back at the hospital, fate seemed to mock their attempts at distance. A minor complication with Evelyn's pregnancy, dizzy spells that alarmed Charles, brought her back for a follow-up sooner than scheduled. When Adrian saw her name on the chart again, his heart sank. Not her. Not so soon. But duty was duty. When she walked into his office, she offered a faint smile. "Doctor." "Mrs. Sterling," he said curtly, not allowing warmth into his tone. He forced his eyes onto the file, refusing to let them linger on her face. The air between them was thick with what was unsaid. Evelyn felt it pressing on her chest. Finally, unable to bear the silence, she spoke. "I hope I didn't unsettle you last time," she said softly. "When I asked about children." Adrian's head snapped up, his jaw tight. "You didn't. That was unprofessional of me. It won't happen again." The coldness in his voice stung her more than she expected. She looked down, swallowing hard. "I didn't mean to pry." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You didn't. But I'm your doctor. That's all I can be." The words were meant as a boundary, but they sounded like a wound. Evelyn nodded slowly, but inside, something in her rebelled. Because for one brief moment, she had felt seen by him in a way she hadn't in years. And yet, here they both were, retreating, resisting, pretending they hadn't felt what they had felt. That night, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her gilded bedroom while Charles snored beside her. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "Why did it feel like your doctor knew us? Like we were part of something bigger?" And in another part of the city, Adrian sat alone with a glass of untouched whiskey, staring at the ultrasound photo he couldn't throw away. His lips trembled as he whispered into the dark, "Why her? Why now?" Neither of them had answers, only questions, and both were terrified of what the answers might mean. When you feel a powerful pull toward someone, but everything in you says stay away, do you listen to your fear or to your heart? Comment below with what you would do. The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the hospital windows like 1,000 impatient fists. Dr. Adrian Cole was finishing his rounds when the call came through. "Patient Evelyn Sterling," the nurse reported, her voice calm but urgent. "Brought in after a fainting spell at home. Stable, but we need you." Adrian froze, a mix of dread and inevitability washing over him. Of all the patients in the city, he closed his eyes for half a second, then forced himself into motion. "Prepare the monitoring room. I'll be there." When he entered, Evelyn was lying on the bed, her face pale but composed. Charles Sterling stood stiffly beside her, his expensive suit immaculate even in crisis. His hand rested on her shoulder, but his eyes were on Adrian the moment he walked in. "You're the doctor?" Charles's tone was clipped, guarded. "Mrs. Sterling," he greeted, his voice taut. "Doctor." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. For a moment, neither said more. The silence felt thick, heavy with all the unsaid words from their last meeting. Finally, Adrian broke it. "Your blood pressure is concerning. Stress could be a factor. You need to be cautious." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Stress is the one luxury my life doesn't afford." Adrian frowned, watching her carefully. Something about the way she said it, the edge in her tone. It was the closest he had heard her come to admitting what he already sensed. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Evelyn, "Are you happy?" Her breath caught. She hadn't expected the question. For a long moment, she stared at the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. "I don't know if I've ever been." The truth hung between them like a fragile thread. Adrian's chest ached at the honesty in her words. It mirrored something in his own life, a hollowness he had never dared put into words. He sat down across from her, lowering his voice. "I wasn't going to ask, but the other day, when you asked if I had children," he paused, his throat tightening. Evelyn's eyes lifted, gentle but steady. "You don't have to tell me." "I need to," he whispered. He leaned back, staring at the wall as if he couldn't face her while saying it. "I had a daughter. Her name was Lily. She was 4, bright, stubborn, loved the rain." His lips trembled faintly at the memory. "One night she got sick. High fever. I thought I could handle it myself, that my training was enough. By the time I realized it wasn't, it was too late." His voice cracked, the memory raw even years later. "I lost her, and I lost my wife soon after. She couldn't forgive me. Maybe she shouldn't have." He exhaled sharply, pressing his hand to his forehead. "That was 5 years ago. Since then, I've kept my distance. From everyone. From everything." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the monitor. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. Slowly, she reached out, her hand hovering in the air between them. "You carry that alone?" she whispered. Adrian hesitated before finally meeting her gaze. His voice was rough. "It's safer that way." Her hand lingered, but she didn't force it. Instead, she whispered, "You remind me of myself." He frowned softly. "How?" Evelyn looked away, her voice breaking. "Because I live in a house full of people, but I've never felt more alone. Because my husband doesn't see me. He sees an heir, a legacy. He doesn't ask me if I'm happy. He doesn't want the answer." Her lips trembled. "But you asked." The silence after her confession was different this time. Not heavy, not suffocating, but fragile, intimate. A thread pulling them closer. Adrian's chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion, connection, the faint, terrifying flicker of hope. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Evelyn, you deserve more than to be invisible." Her tears spilled freely then. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Because I know what it is to be broken," he murmured. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, neither of them felt as alone as they had before. The appointment ended, but something had shifted irrevocably. They had both revealed their scars, different, yet hauntingly similar. As Evelyn stepped out of the hospital, the city air heavy around her, she whispered to her baby, "He understands. For the first time in my life, someone understands." And back inside, Adrian sat with his head in his hands, whispering into the emptiness of his office. "Why does it feel like I've known her forever?" The rain had passed, leaving the hospital washed clean under a pale morning light. For once, Adrian Cole didn't dread the day ahead. Something about his conversation with Evelyn lingered inside him, softening edges he thought were permanent. He had spoken Lily's name aloud for the first time in years, and somehow it hadn't destroyed him. Instead, it had eased something. Evelyn returned the following week for another checkup. She walked into his office with a hesitant smile, her hair loose around her shoulders, a scarf wrapped delicately across her growing belly. "Good morning, doctor," she said, her tone lighter than before. Adrian looked up from the file in his hands. For the briefest moment, his lips twitched into something resembling a smile. "Mrs. Sterling." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Still so formal?" He cleared his throat, looking down quickly. "It's habit." "Evelyn," she corrected gently. "At least when it's just us." Something in his chest stirred at the sound of her name spoken like that, soft and real. He nodded once. "Evelyn." The ultrasound went smoothly. The baby kicked, making Evelyn gasp and laugh in delight. Adrian found himself chuckling quietly, the sound foreign on his lips. "You're smiling," she teased, turning her head toward him. He stiffened. "I Don't deny it, she said warmly. I saw it. He shook his head, embarrassed, but the corners of his mouth betrayed him again. It's rare that patients laugh during scans. Well, maybe you needed one who does, she said softly. The room grew still at that. They looked at each other, two people who had known only loss and loneliness, sharing a moment of light. Later, as Evelyn prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Doctor, would you mind walking me to the garden? Just for a few minutes. She paused, searching for the right words. I don't want to go home yet. Adrian hesitated. Every instinct told him to maintain distance, to keep their worlds separate. But something stronger pulled at him. He nodded. All right. The hospital garden was quiet, a hidden oasis of green framed by brick walls. Evelyn lowered herself onto a bench, sighing with relief as the sunlight touched her face. Adrian stood nearby, unsure, until she patted the space beside her. You can sit, you know, she said with a faint smile. He sat, his posture rigid at first, but slowly easing. For a while, they simply sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. Finally, Evelyn broke the quiet. Do you ever wonder if the people we've lost are still with us somehow? Adrian's throat tightened. All the time. I talk to this baby, she admitted, placing a hand over her belly. But sometimes I feel like I'm also talking to the little girl I was. The one who wanted to be loved just for who she was. Maybe she listens. Adrian turned his head toward her, his chest aching. I think she does. Their eyes met, and in that shared stillness, they both felt it, a kind of recognition deeper than words. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden beds. Evelyn laughed suddenly, her hand flying to her belly. What is it? Adrian asked quickly, alarmed. He kicked, she said, her face alight with joy. Oh my God, he kicked. Adrian blinked, surprised, then smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile. That's a good sign. She grabbed his hand impulsively, pressing it against her stomach. Here, feel. The contact startled him. Her hand was warm against his. His pulse quickened as he waited, and then he felt it. A small, firm nudge against his palm. Evelyn's eyes sparkled. Did you feel that? Adrian's throat tightened. Yes. His voice cracked softly, emotion rising. Yes, I did. They stayed like that a moment longer than necessary, her hand over his, both of them connected by the life growing inside her. When she finally pulled back, the absence of her touch felt sharper than he expected. From that day on, their appointments carried a different energy. Evelyn teased him gently when his seriousness returned. Adrian, though still guarded, found himself softening around her in ways he hadn't around anyone else in years. One afternoon, she asked him about Lily, not with pity, but with curiosity, as though she wanted to keep her alive in memory. And for the first time, Adrian spoke freely about his daughter's laugh, her stubbornness, her love of butterflies. Evelyn listened with tears in her eyes, not out of sorrow, but reverence. In return, she told him about her childhood, how she had grown up in a modest home, dreaming of art and freedom, only to find herself caged in marble halls as a trophy wife. Adrian listened, his heart tightening at every confession. It wasn't just pain they shared. It was laughter too. When Evelyn joked about hospital gowns being designed by people who had never worn clothes, Adrian surprised himself by laughing out loud. The sound startled them both, and then warmed them. You should laugh more, she said gently. He looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, maybe I just needed a reason. For the first time in years, both of them felt something shift. Not love yet, not fully, but its fragile beginnings. Hope, healing. And yet, beneath the warmth, both knew it was dangerous. Evelyn was married. Adrian was her doctor. The world would not forgive the closeness growing between them. But sitting together in that garden, their hands brushing as they watched the sunlight filter through the leaves, neither wanted to think about the world. For now, they were just two broken souls who had found someone who understood. Do you think two people who carry so much pain can truly heal each other? Or does love only add more risk? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. The evening had turned cold, with rain streaking the wide hospital windows. Adrian was finishing paperwork when he heard his name spoken sharply. Dr. Cole. He looked up. Charles Sterling stood in the doorway, towering, his tailored suit unwrinkled despite the weather. His eyes were like glass, cold and unblinking. Adrian rose slowly. Mr. Sterling, this is unexpected. Charles stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. I don't appreciate surprises, especially when they involve my wife. Adrian's chest tightened, but his face remained neutral. Evelyn's health is my only concern. Is it? Charles leaned forward slightly, his voice a low hiss. Because I hear she spends more time in this hospital than anywhere else. And she talks about you. More than she should. Adrian's jaw clenched. She's my patient. Nothing more. Charles's smirk was sharp. Don't insult me, doctor. I didn't become a billionaire by ignoring what's right in front of me. He leaned closer, his voice icy. Stay away from her. Do your job, collect your paycheck, and forget whatever connection you think exists. My wife belongs to me. The words sliced through Adrian. He stayed silent, but his fists curled against his sides. Charles straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. I'll be moving Evelyn's care to another doctor. This little arrangement ends now. And with that, he walked out, leaving Adrian shaken, furious, and hollow all at once. The next day, Evelyn entered Adrian's office, her face pale, her movements restless. Adrian, she whispered as soon as the door closed behind her. He looked up, his chest aching at the sound of his name on her lips. But the pain in her eyes told him everything. He spoke to you. Tears glistened, but she held them back. He threatened you. He said. I know what he said. Adrian interrupted sharply, more harshly than he intended. He turned away, running a hand over his face. Evelyn, this, whatever we've been doing, it can't continue. She froze. What do you mean? He forced himself to meet her gaze. You're married. To a man who clearly watches your every move. If he's already suspicious, then... You're pushing me away, she said softly, her voice trembling. Adrian's voice cracked. Because I have to. If I don't, he'll destroy both of us. And your child doesn't deserve that. Her tears finally spilled. Don't do this. Don't hide behind logic. I know you feel it too. What we share, it's real. Adrian's heart screamed to agree, but his fear was louder. You're my patient, and I crossed a line I never should have. It ends here. The words were knives in his own throat. Evelyn's breath caught like a sob strangled in her chest. You don't mean that. But he didn't correct her. He couldn't. The silence between them was worse than shouting. Worse than anything. Finally, Evelyn's voice cracked with brokenness. I thought I finally found someone who saw me, who heard me. But maybe I was wrong. Adrian stepped forward instinctively, but she lifted her hand, stopping him cold. Her voice was sharp now, brittle with pain. No, don't come closer. You said it ends here, so let it. She turned and left, the echo of her footsteps tearing through him. That night, Adrian sat alone in his darkened apartment. The rain outside beat against the glass, just as it had the night Lily died. He pressed his hands against his face, whispering into the silence, I couldn't save her. And now I can't save you either. At the Sterling mansion, Evelyn lay awake in bed while Charles slept beside her. Her hands pressed protectively over her belly as tears streamed silently down her face. She whispered into the darkness, I thought he was different. I thought he was mine. But in both their hearts, one truth screamed louder than the storm. They had finally found someone who understood them, and now they had lost it. The hospital halls felt colder without her. Adrian noticed it in the small ways, the silence in his office, the absence of Evelyn's gentle laugh echoing down the corridor. Weeks passed, but her absence clung to him like a shadow. He buried himself in work. Patient after patient, chart after chart, until exhaustion became his only shield. But at night, when the walls of his apartment pressed in, the truth cut through. He missed her, not as a patient, not as a distraction, but as the only person who had touched the broken pieces of him and made him believe they could fit together again. Evelyn, meanwhile, felt her world tightening. Charles's suspicions had grown. He monitored her movements, sent his assistant with her to appointments, and insisted she rest at home. Rest, he called it. Imprisonment, she felt it. She painted when she could, soft strokes of color on canvas in the quiet of her studio, but even her art betrayed her. Every image carried hints of Adrian, his somber eyes, his steady hands, the rare smile he tried to hide. One night, as she stood before an unfinished canvas, she whispered aloud, "Why did you give up on us so easily?" Her unborn child shifted within her, and she pressed a trembling hand to her belly. "Do I give up too? Or do I fight for the only thing that's ever felt real?" Adrian found himself walking through the hospital garden one evening. The bench where they had sat together felt haunted now, heavy with memories. He sat down, running a hand through his hair, his voice breaking the stillness. "I pushed her away because I thought it was noble," he murmured. "But maybe it was just fear. Fear of losing again." He pulled a small box from his coat pocket, a bracelet of lilies he always carried but never showed anyone. The charm glinted under the fading light. "I thought love only brought pain," he whispered. But with her, it felt like breathing again. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he knew walking away wasn't strength. It was cowardice. The turning point came one late afternoon. Evelyn had managed to slip out of the mansion under the guise of a shopping trip. Instead, she found herself outside the hospital, her heart pounding. She hadn't planned it. Her feet simply carried her there. When she saw Adrian exiting the building, exhaustion written across his face, she froze. Part of her wanted to flee, but something stronger pushed her forward. Adrian. His name on her lips stopped him like a blade. He turned, disbelief flashing in his eyes. Evelyn. For a moment, neither moved. The distance between them was unbearable. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend the only place I felt alive wasn't here, with you." He swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling as though each breath hurt. "You shouldn't have come. If Charles finds out." "Let him," she interrupted fiercely, her tears glinting in the fading sun. "I've lived my whole life in his shadow. For once, I want to live in my truth. And that truth is you." Adrian's heart thundered. He stepped closer, trembling with the weight of choice. "Evelyn, if we do this, there's no going back. It won't be safe. It won't be easy." Her eyes searched his, filled with both fear and determination. "I don't need safe anymore. I need real." The silence between them was thick, every second an eternity. Adrian closed his eyes, fighting every instinct to retreat, but when he opened them again, his decision was clear. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, trembling but unbreakable. "No more running," he whispered. "If we fall together." That night, they didn't speak of plans or logistics. They simply sat side by side in the garden, holding hands, the world shrinking down to the rhythm of their breaths. Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, Adrian felt peace. Not because the danger was gone, but because he had finally chosen love over fear. And though tomorrow loomed with uncertainty, tonight they had chosen each other. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between safety and love? Which would you choose if you were in their place? Share your thoughts in the comments. The storm finally broke weeks later, but not in the way either of them expected. Charles Sterling's empire had begun to crack. Headlines filled the news. Accusations of corruption, investigations into fraudulent dealings. The Sterling mansion, once a symbol of power, now felt more like a gilded prison under siege. In the chaos, Evelyn saw her opening. Charles, consumed by his legal battles, loosened his grip. and with a courage she had never known she possessed, she walked away. Not to another mansion, not to another cage, but to the one place where she had once felt truly seen. Adrian was on shift when she appeared in the waiting room, carrying nothing but a small bag and the quiet glow of resolve in her eyes. "Evelyn," he breathed, stunned. She smiled through trembling lips. "I'm done running, done hiding. I want a life that's mine. And if you'll have me, I want it with you." For a moment, he couldn't speak. The weight of every sleepless night, every whispered regret, came crashing down. Then, without hesitation, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. This time, there was no fear, only the raw, undeniable truth that they had already survived the breaking point and chosen each other anyway. Months later, the ultrasound room no longer felt like a battlefield of ghosts. Evelyn lay on the bed, her hand intertwined with Adrian's as the monitor hummed to life. The same flickering heartbeat appeared, tiny yet fierce. Adrian's throat tightened, but instead of dread, tears of wonder filled his eyes. He whispered, "Last time I saw this image, it felt like losing everything. But now, it feels like being given a second chance." Evelyn turned to him, her own eyes glistening. "Not just a second chance, Adrian. Our chance." The room was silent except for the steady rhythm of their child's heartbeat, echoing like a promise. On the day their daughter was born, the world seemed to still. Adrian held the tiny bundle in his arms, her small fingers curling instinctively around his. He looked at Evelyn, radiant despite her exhaustion, and whispered, "She has your eyes." Evelyn laughed softly, tears slipping free. "And your stubborn chin." They leaned together, their daughter between them, and for the first time in both their lives, there was no loneliness, no chains of grief, no gilded prisons. Only love. Weeks later, sitting in the garden where so much had begun, Evelyn painted as Adrian cradled their newborn on the bench. She looked up from her canvas, smiling at the sight. "Funny," she said. "I used to paint to escape. Now I paint to remember, to hold on to what's real." Adrian kissed the baby's forehead gently, then looked at Evelyn. "And what's real?" She set her brush down and met his gaze. "Us. This. The fact that sometimes the life you thought was over is just beginning." He reached for her hand, the same way he had that night when they chose each other, and squeezed it gently. No more running. No more hiding. Just love. Unexpected, imperfect, but theirs. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Adrian whispered a final thought he once would have been too afraid to believe. "I never thought I'd say this again, but I'm home." And Evelyn, with tears of joy glistening in her eyes, leaned against him and answered, "So am I."
Thank you for watching this video to the very end. I'm pretty sure you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting and awesome stories lined out for you already. So click on the image showing on your screen to watch the next one, and don't forget to subscribe.